friends. I'm so glad you're with me today. I've got a new book to share with you. This one is called Easter in the Garden, and it's by Pamela Kennedy with illustrations by David Wenzel. And what makes this book a little bit different is that it's the story of the first Easter, but it's told through the point of view of this little boy, Micah. I think you're going to like it. So let's get started. On the first page, we see a picture of Micah in an olive tree. Keep your eyes open for when and how this olive tree appears again, because it's kind of important to the story. Micah carried a small rake and a stick that was sharpened at one end. He tried to step in the footprints left by his father's sandals in the dusty Jerusalem road as they walked to the garden where his father worked. Micah felt proud that he had his own tools to use as he helped his father dig up weeds or rake the dead leaves from under the olive trees. Sometimes, if there were flowers blooming, Micah picked a small bouquet to take home to his mother. Then she would smile, pat him on the head, and tell him that one day he would grow up to be a wonderful gardener, just like his father. But there was something else Micah liked to do, even more than working in the garden. When the morning sun was just starting to wake up the world, Micah loved to creep out of the house and go to the garden by himself. In the center of the garden, an old olive tree raised its twisted limbs toward the sky. Micah wedged his toes and fingers into the bumpy bark and clambered up the trunk to one of the highest branches. There he hid in the soft green leaves, pretending he was a bird or a shiny-eyed lizard, waiting for a tasty cricket to hop by. One morning, as Micah sat daydreaming in the olive tree, he spied a surprise tucked into a forked branch. It was a small brown bird's nest. Carefully, he crept along the branch until he could look more closely, and in the nest, Micah found 3 small speckled eggs. He wondered what kind of bird had laid them and when they might hatch. After that morning, each time Micah went to the garden, he scampered up the tree to check on the eggs. But they always looked the same, still and smooth as small speckled stones. One day, after helping his father, Micah stayed behind to peek into the nest one more time. Nothing had changed. Micah sighed. Then he had a scary thought. What if the baby birds weren't going to hatch? What if they had died? Slowly, he climbed down the tree trunk and started up the dusty road toward home. Just then, he heard loud voices in the distance. Micah ran to see what was happening. He saw a crowd of angry people yelling and waving their fists in the air. Roman soldiers dressed in bronze helmets and red tunics waved their iron swords, ordering the crowds to make way. They looked so fierce, so Micah ducked behind a stone wall and waited for the mob to pass by, his heart pounding with fear. As soon as they were gone, Micah ran all the way home. "Mother, mother!" he shouted as he rushed through the doorway. Micah's mother sat on a low stool with her head in her hands. When she looked up, Micah could see the tears shining in her dark eyes. She held out her arms, and Micah ran into them. "What's happening?" Micah asked as his mother held him tightly. Micah's mother told him that something very sad had happened. Their friend, Jesus, was dead. Bad men had killed him. Micah's eyes filled with tears too. He and his family believed Jesus was God's son. He had come to share God's love with people and to tell them to be kind and forgiving to each other. Once, Micah's mother had taken him to see Jesus, and Micah got to sit on Jesus' lap. Jesus had smiled, and Micah had felt safe. But he didn't feel safe anymore. He felt afraid. The next day was Saturday, the Sabbath. Micah stayed indoors with his family all day. They talked about God and about Jesus, and they lit the Sabbath candles and had a meal of roasted lamb and bread. No one did work on the Sabbath day. It was a time to rest and be with the people you loved. Micah usually felt happy and safe on the Sabbath, but not today. He thought about the angry people and about never seeing Jesus again, and about the little eggs that wouldn't hatch. Earlier the next day, Micah woke up while it was still dark. He remembered the scary feeling he had when the angry people shouted and the soldiers marched through the trees. Then Micah remembered the nest in the olive tree and the 3 speckled eggs. What had happened to them? Were they still there? Quickly he tossed his tunic over his head and tied his sandals on his feet. Quietly, he tiptoed out of the house. Then he raced to the garden and scrambled up the old olive tree. Carefully, he crept out onto the branch and peeked into the bird's nest. The 3 speckled eggs were still as stones. Then Micah heard voices. Someone was coming. He ducked behind a branch and peeked out through the leaves. He tried to stay as still as the little eggs in the nest. Some women hurried up the path and passed right below Micah. They carried baskets and were crying and whispering silently. Suddenly, a bright light shone in front of the women, and they gasped in fear and hid their faces. Micah felt his heart pounding. He didn't know what was happening. The light seemed to fade, and Micah saw a man standing in front of the women. He wore a robe of glistening white, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. It sounded kind. The man told the women that Jesus was not dead. He was alive. Then he told the women to hurry and tell Jesus' friends the good news. The women were so excited they dropped their baskets, grabbed up their robes, and ran from the garden, laughing with joy. Micah was so excited he almost fell out of the tree. As he grabbed a branch to catch himself, he saw something wiggle in the bird's nest. One of the speckled eggs was cracked. When he looked more closely, Micah saw a tiny beak pointing out of the shell. The egg was beginning to hatch. Jesus is alive, little bird, Micah whispered. You don't have to hide. It's safe to come out of your shell now because Jesus is alive. Micah jumped to the ground. He wasn't afraid anymore. He looked around the garden. The first pink rays of sunlight were shining in the east, and streaks of gold and purple lit up the early morning sky. Dew sparkled across on the grasses and flowers. Then he heard the first tiny chirp of a baby bird. The whole world was waking up to a brand new day. And Micah couldn't wait to tell his family the best news of all. Jesus is alive. And that, my friends, is Easter in the garden. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you next time.